Imagine being a high-powered CEO, all set for a first-class flight to your next big meeting, only to have the airline deny you boarding. Sounds frustrating, right? But this isn't just any regular passenger. This is a woman who's built an empire, and she's not about to let something like this slide. What happens next will leave you speechless. In this story, we'll follow a powerful businesswoman who's faced with a humiliating moment, denied entry to the luxurious first-class cabin she had every right to. But instead of just accepting the situation, she does something that's straight out of a corporate playbook, except this time is a move that will leave the airline stunned. One phone call later, and the game is on. But what could a single phone call really do in this situation? You'd be surprised. The CEO's response sends shockwaves through the airline's entire operation. And this is where things take a wild turn. Was this a simple mistake? Or did she have a bigger plan in mind all along? Stick around, because the next part of the story will blow your mind, and you won't believe how it all unfolds. So, what led to this moment? It all started earlier that day when Laura, a self-made CEO, arrived at the airport, excited for a well-deserved break after a grueling week of board meetings and negotiations. With a first-class ticket in hand, she walked through the airport with the confidence of someone who's been at the top for years. But as she approached the gate, things took a strange turn. Despite her priority boarding, the airline staff informed her that her seat had been accidentally overbooked. They apologized and offered to put her in economy, but Laura wasn't having it. After all, she was a loyal customer who'd flown countless miles, racking up VIP status, and she knew her rights. Still, the staff insisted there was nothing they could do, and soon, the situation escalated. In that moment, Laura could have let the frustration take over. She could have been just another upset traveler, shouting for attention. But she wasn't just anyone. Laura knew that in business, every moment, every setback, was an opportunity to make a statement, and so she calmly walked away, pulling out her phone and dialing a number she knew would make things move. Little did the airline know, they were about to face a storm. But what exactly did she say on that call? Whatever it was, it set everything into motion, and now the tension in the air was palpable. As Laura stood in the corner, phone pressed to her ear, the frustration of the entire situation began to sink in. She had dealt with her share of corporate missteps before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about missing a flight, it was about principle. How could an airline of this size treat a customer, let alone a VIP, like this? She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, some looking with pity, others with curiosity, unsure of what was going to happen next. On the other side of the terminal, a team of airline executives was just getting wind of the situation. They'd heard rumors about the CEO who was demanding her rightful seat back, but they figured it would blow over. After all, overbooking happens all the time, and most passengers don't make a scene. But this wasn't the typical case. Laura wasn't about to let it slide, and the airline's customer service team was getting nervous. Their initial response had been one of indifference, but now they were scrambling. They knew her name, but they hadn't connected the dots yet. Back at the gate, one of the ground staff, a young woman named Claire, watched Laura with growing unease. Claire had been working the counter for a few months now, and she had dealt with her share of irate customers. But there was something different about this woman. There was an air of quiet authority about her, something Claire couldn't quite place. It wasn't long before Claire realized that the phone call Laura was making wasn't just to any customer service line, it was to someone high up, someone who could turn this entire situation upside down. As the minutes ticked by, Laura remained calm, her voice steady as she spoke to the person on the other end of the line. But behind the composed exterior, she was strategizing, her mind running through possible outcomes. She wasn't sure how this would play out, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not back down. And when the airline made the mistake of underestimating her, they were in for a wake-up call in the meantime. A ripple effect was happening within the airline's corporate structure. The phone call that Laura had made was working its way through the ranks. Higher-ups who had no idea this was coming were now getting pulled into the situation. Some were furious, seeing this as a small, avoidable issue, while others were starting to feel the weight of what could become a public relations nightmare. Was the CEO just trying to make a point, or did she have something bigger in mind? Every second that passed made the situation feel more explosive, and no one knew how it would end. But as Claire watched the situation unfold, she had a sense that this wasn't just about a seat on a plane. Laura had something up her sleeve, and it was only a matter of time before the airline would be forced to confront the full extent of their mistake. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Laura stood by the gate, her expression unreadable, but inside, her mind was racing. The phone call had been brief but calculated, and she knew the wheels were already in motion. She could almost feel a shift in the air as the airline executives processed the gravity of her call. Laura wasn't just some upset traveler, she was a force to be reckoned with. She had a reputation for solving problems quickly, decisively, and often with devastating consequences for anyone standing in her way. Back at the airline's headquarters, things were heating up. Word was spreading fast about the CEO's call, and the higher-ups were beginning to realize just how badly they had mishandled the situation. They had hoped to avoid escalating the matter, but now it seemed inevitable. The situation was quickly spiraling out of their control, and the pressure was mounting. A senior manager, now fully aware of who Laura was, had just rushed to inform the airline's PR team, but it was already too late to stop the fallout. The clock was ticking, and the airport had started to feel like a pressure cooker. Tension rippled through the terminal. Some passengers were whispering about the unusual situation unfolding at the gate, others were trying to piece together the story, and a few even pulled out their phones, starting to document the drama. Laura remained calm, but the situation was far from over. She wasn't just fighting for a seat on a plane. She was about to launch an attack on a system that had taken advantage of passengers for too long. Meanwhile, Claire, the young gate agent, had noticed that her colleagues were starting to get more anxious as the situation unfolded. The airline's customer service was being flooded with calls, and everyone in the terminal seemed to be bracing for something big. She could feel the tension mounting in her own chest. The CEO wasn't backing down, and neither was the airline, but who would blink first? As Laura stood there, her phone still pressed to her ear, she made a few final quiet arrangements. The next steps were critical, and she was prepared for anything. But the final piece of the puzzle wasn't in her hands yet. She knew the airline would eventually make an attempt to fix things. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for that first move. And when it came, Laura would make her response swift and unforgiving. The tension between the airline's desire to avoid a scandal and Laura's unyielding resolve created a standoff that was rapidly reaching its breaking point. The next few minutes would determine everything. Would they find a way to smooth things over, or would Laura take the ultimate step and make the airline regret their mistake forever? The stage was set, but no one knew who would be the first to make a move. As the tension continued to build, it seemed like the airline was stalling, hoping the situation would resolve itself. The senior executives had gathered in an emergency meeting, but the hours were slipping by, and nothing concrete had come from them. Laura stood at the gate, still poised and unflinching, though she knew time was running out for the airline. Then, without warning, something unexpected happened. The airport's security team, unaware of the growing storm, arrived at the gate, responding to a disturbance. The agent in charge, a stern-looking man named Mark, walked straight up to Laura. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he demanded that she leave the gate area. His tone was firm, almost as if he'd been instructed to handle her with force. It caught everyone off guard. The passengers who had been whispering, documenting, or watching the drama unfold now froze in confusion. The young gate agent, Claire, watched in disbelief, knowing there was no way this could end well. Mark's presence only escalated the situation. His approach felt like an intimidation tactic, but it had the opposite effect on Laura. Instead of backing down, she straightened her posture, her gaze cold and calculating. It was a pivotal moment. Claire could see the spark of something powerful in Laura's eyes, and she realized this was no longer about a single passenger's grievance. It was a fight for something much bigger, a fight for respect. Laura's voice, sharp and steady, filled the air. "You don't want to do this," she said, her eyes locked onto Mark's. "You don't know who I am." Mark hesitated, but only for a brief moment. He had no idea who he was dealing with. His role was simply to enforce orders, but Laura wasn't an average passenger. The tension was palpable. Around them, passengers were shifting uncomfortably, watching the scene unfold, but none of them knew just how high the stakes had become. Laura's phone rang, and she answered it without missing a beat, her eyes never leaving Mark. Her voice dropped to a near whisper as she spoke, but even from a distance, it was clear that whatever she was hearing on the other end was setting the stage for a game-changing move. Claire, now more anxious than ever, could sense that the ground was about to shift. The phone call had done something. She could see it in Laura's posture. The air was thick with anticipation, and the question on everyone's mind was clear. What would Laura do next? Would the airline's gamble with security backfire, or would they finally give in to her demands, realizing just how much they stood to lose if they didn't? As the seconds dragged on, the tension in the terminal seemed to increase. Everyone felt it, and Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the whole situation was teetering on the edge of something monumental. Then, just as the quiet before the storm reached its peak, Laura put her phone down with a calm finality. She looked up at Mark, then turned her gaze toward the approaching airline managers, and it was in that moment that Claire saw it. Laura wasn't just looking for an apology. She was preparing to reshape the entire narrative. The stakes had just been raised higher than anyone could have anticipated. The room went dead silent as Laura stood, her eyes unwavering, as she locked gazes with the airline security officer and the now frantic airline managers rushing toward the gate. The tension was thick, each second stretching longer than the last. Laura wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. She was waiting for them to understand the gravity of what they were dealing with. Mark, still standing before her, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her stare. But before he could speak, the airline managers arrived, their faces a mix of anxiety and disbelief. They hadn't expected this much of a spectacle. As they approached, Laura turned to face them directly, her calm demeanor belying the fire in her voice. "I'm not here to argue about my seat," she said, each word deliberate. "I'm here to tell you that your company has just made a massive mistake. You don't just lose a customer, you lose the loyalty of every person who sees how this goes down. You're about to find out how badly you've miscalculated." The managers exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't expected this level of confrontation. Laura wasn't just asking for compensation or an apology. She was positioning herself as a force of change. Laura's phone buzzed again, this time with a notification that made her smile. A message from the board of directors at a major competitor airline, offering her a partnership and sponsorship deal, contingent on a single condition. The airline in question had to be publicly shamed for their actions. The room froze. Laura's next words rang out like a hammer striking metal. "This is your last chance to make this right. Apologize, give me the seat, or face the consequences of what's about to unfold. I've already made my call." The airline managers didn't know what to say. Before they could even respond, a few well-dressed executives from the competitor airline showed up at the gate, ready for a very public and very high-profile meeting. They had anticipated this moment.